Okay, so now that we've talked about how water and minerals can get into the plants, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the mechanisms that they use to get through the plants. First, we're going to talk about short distance transport, and then we're going to talk about long distance transport. But this next video is just about short distance transport of water and minerals that come in through the root hairs, and how do they get to the vascular tissue or the xylem into the center of the root. By the way, the vascular tissue in the center of the root is often called the stele. I don't refer to it like that in this video, but you may see it like that in your textbook. So there are basically two terms that I need to familiarize you with for you to understand the different types of transport, short distance transport of water and minerals into the middle of the root. First, we need to talk about what apoplast is. So apoplast consists of everything that is external to the plasma membrane. If you're talking about a cell or something that's apoplast, then that means it is not traveling inside the cell, but it is traveling outside the cell membrane. So the apoplast consists of cell walls, which are not within the plasma membrane, extracellular spaces, or the spaces between the cell walls of two adjacent cells, and also apoplast includes the interior of dead cells, such as vessel elements and tracheids that are found within the xylem. So all of that, as long as whatever is moving is not moving through the cytosol or the cytoplasm, that would be considered apoplast. The symplast, the light went out, so I'm going to fix it. Okay, so the symplast consists of the cytosol and all of the living cells within a plant, as well as the plasmodesmata. You may or may not have heard of plasmodesmata. I think I've used it before in a lecture, but these are little spaces that allow movement of substances between cells. You're going to see pictures of it in just a second. So the symplast is basically in the cytosol of the plant, of a plant cell. Trying to advance the slide. There we go. Okay, so now that you know what the apoplast and the symplast are, I can talk to you about the three different transport routes for water and solutes. So the apoplastic route, that is when the water or nutrients travel through the cell walls or between cell walls and the extracellular spaces. So you can envision water sort of traveling within cell walls or between cells, but not within the cytosol of a cell. So not going through the cell membrane at all. The symplastic route, on the other hand, is where water and solutes cross through a plasma membrane once, and then they move through the cytosol of multiple cells, adjacent cells, that are connected through plasmodesmata. So they are moving from one cell to the next through the plasmodesmata, and you're going to see that in a figure in just a second. The third one is the transmembrane route, which is kind of a combination of the apoplastic route and the symplastic route. In this case, the water and the nutrients repeatedly cross plasma membranes as they pass from cell to cell. So they go in and out of the different cells. So sometimes they're traveling, sometimes it's traveling within the cytosol, and sometimes it's traveling between or within cell walls. Again, you're going to see all these routes in just a second. So here's a really simplified version of the three different routes. In this case, you can see here's the cell wall of a plant cell, and this is the cytosol of that same plant cell. And these little openings that are joining the cytosol of multiple plant cells, these are the plasmodesmata that I was talking about. Okay, so they're like little channels that connect the cells. In the apoplastic route, water or nutrients would be traveling through the cell wall, but would never make it into the cytosol. Okay. Please note too that another way that an apoplastic route could work is if the water and nutrients were actually moving along the outside of the cell wall between two cells. Okay, so either of those would be considered apoplastic. The symplastic route is when the materials are traveling through the cytosol of multiple cells and they are not leaving or passing through cell membranes as they're moving from one cell to the next. They're moving through the cytosol and through the plasmodesmata that are joining the cells with each other. So that's the symplastic route, where entirely the movement of the materials is entirely through the cytosol of the cells. And finally, the transmembrane route, which again is the sort of combination of both. You can see the materials would be passing in and out of the cell membranes and in and out of the cytosol, multiple different places as it's moving through these different plant cells. Okay, so remember the point, as I've said before, the point of this transport, this short distance transport, is to get from the root, in this case the root hair. Here's the soil around here. Water and nutrients are going to come in through the root hair, and they need to somehow find their way into the vascular tissue, which is in the middle of the root right here. Okay, so that's what these different routes are. We have the symplastic route where the water, in this case we're just going to talk about water because it's easier to envision. The water is moving through the cells, and it's joining, these cells are being joined by plasmodesmata, so you can see that it's traveling through the cytosol of all these cells. Okay, so this would be a symplastic route into the middle of the root, which is where the vascular tissue is. Here's another path of water. This is showing you the apoplastic. In this case, the apoplastic is, it's entering through in between two cell walls here, and it's moving in between cell walls here until eventually it's going to get into the vascular tissue in the middle. I'm going to show you in a second how there can be some barriers here that will make that a little bit difficult. You may not be able to see this, so I'll have to check it. But in this case, this is just showing these cell walls really close up, and the two routes are... Okay, I think I moved the webcam so that it's not blocking this lower figure here, which I think will help. One thing that's really important to note is that if water is moving through the symplast route, like right here, it's moving through the plasmodesmata, and it can easily enter the middle of the root without any stopping, without being stopped by anything. Once it's within the cell membrane or the plasma membrane of the cell, it basically has a free pass to get all the way in to the center of the cell, or from this case, this is the symplastic route, and so it's moving through the plasmodesmata, doesn't get stopped here, and it can move all the way in freely. Now, remember that not everything gets allowed into the plasma membrane. The things that were easily allowed into the plasma membrane from the roots are things like water, carbon dioxide, oxygen, and certain structures that are lipophilic. So apoplast route has a problem though, because for water and nutrients moving through this direction, they can move all the way close to the middle of the root where the vascular tissue is, except for it gets stopped at this layer right here, which is called the endoderm. The endoderm is a layer of cells. You can see it right here. It's a layer of cells, And around those cells, there's sort of a waxy substance called the Casparian strip. And that blocks the water from getting past it and into the vascular tissue of the middle of the cell. So the Casparian strip sort of acts like a gatekeeper, and it doesn't allow everything in. Water and nutrients that can easily diffuse across or through osmosis get across the plasma membrane. Once they get stopped by the Casparian strip, they might move from one cell or another, but they can move through the cell walls. If they can get into a plasma membrane, they have a free rein to go in through here and get into the vascular tissue. But other things that can't move through the cell wall or plasma membrane, they get turned away and don't get to move into the vascular tissue. Incidentally, there's this layer of cells, a single ring of cells that is just interior to the endoderm, and it's called the pericycle. I don't know if y'all remember what the pericycle does, but if not, this is the source of lateral roots. So this is the area where the lateral roots will grow out as the plant gets bigger. This is a quick animation of the process that we were just talking about, so let's run through that.
As a plant lives and grows, it absorbs carbon dioxide and oxygen from the air and water and minerals from the soil. How does the plant move these substances to where they are needed for chemical reactions such as photosynthesis? Water and minerals are transported upward within the xylem as xylem sap. First, however, water and minerals are absorbed by the roots, so we will start there. The surface area of a root is enormously expanded by thousands of root hairs and symbiotic mycorrhizae. The root hairs are in direct contact with water and dissolved inorganic ions held in tiny spaces between soil particles. Water and ions can travel into the root by the apoplastic route, moving between cells and along cell walls, or by the symplastic route, moving from cell to cell through plasmodesmata. A molecule or ion may also move through the root via a combination of these two routes, or by moving slowly from cell to cell across plasma membranes and cell walls. All water and ions eventually have to pass through cell membranes, and this is how the plant controls their uptake. Even water and ions that are traveling by the apoplastic route must eventually pass through cells because of a waxy waterproof band called the Casparian strip. This forces all water and solutes to pass through the plasma membranes of endodermis cells, and thus these cells are able to exert ultimate control over the kinds and amounts of substances that enter the plant. Once the selected solutes and water are in the endodermis cells, they can be discharged into the xylem for transport to the rest of the plant.
Okay, so I believe that's the end of this video, and I think there is one more until the end of the lecture.